That's the second thing. Number one, there's no precedent for the belief in the resurrection. Number two, belief in the resurrection was from the very beginning, in the early 30s AD. The third reason historians take the resurrection quite seriously is that there was almost certainly an empty tomb shortly after Jesus was laid there, after his death. How do we know this? Well, there's a few reasons historians would point out. Number one, separate, independent sources attest to the empty tomb. When independent sources, that is sources who haven't copied each other, say roughly the same thing about an event or person from the past, that event takes on plausibility. This is called the criterion of multiple attestation, which you don't need to know, but it just means that when multiple sources say roughly the same thing, it takes on some credibility. Multiple sources independently talk about the empty tomb. But more importantly, we know that the opponents of Christianity, particularly the Jewish upper echelons in antiquity, agreed there was an empty tomb. They just disputed how it got that way. They said that the disciples stole it. So if that was the counterclaim of the leadership in that period, that is proof that they accepted there was an empty tomb. Even the great Jewish scholar today at Oxford University, Professor Gezer Vermesh, is certain there was an empty tomb. So there's no cultural precedent for a belief in the resurrection. We know the resurrection was fundamental to Christian belief from the beginning. And thirdly, there was almost certainly an empty tomb. The fourth reason, historians take the resurrection seriously. And just to underline, I'm not saying that this proves the resurrection. These are not four proofs. These are just the four reasons historians are still puzzling over this whole thing. It's this. We know for sure that significant numbers of men and women put themselves forward in the period as eyewitnesses to the appearances of Jesus after his death. How do we know this? Well, apart from the fact that just about every book of the New Testament refers to these eyewitnesses, we have this incredible little summary in 1 Corinthians that I referred to, where the testimony of Peter is referred to, the testimony of the 12 apostles, that is. But also there's another reason. Historians take as early and credible the gospel reports that women were the first to witness the empty tomb and the risen Jesus. This may not seem very significant in the modern world, but you need to know that in antiquity, women's testimony was not regarded as valid in a court of law. There are plenty of references we could point to in Josephus and in the Mishnah that show that women's testimony was disallowed. So here's the thing you've got to work out. How come, in a culture where women's testimony was not regarded as valid, do the gospel writers, all four of them, say that women were the first to witness the empty tomb and the risen Jesus? It just makes no sense that they would invent that unless it just happened to be embarrassingly true. And so you'll find that mainstream historians, even agnostic ones who don't believe in things like resurrections, will admit that it is a historical fact that significant numbers of people put themselves forward as eyewitnesses to the bodily resurrection of Jesus. I'm thinking particularly of Professor Ed Sanders at Duke University, who himself doesn't confess to believing in miracles. He shuns them in terms of making a theological statement, but he does say that the experience of the early disciples seeing Jesus is a fact of history. What gave rise to that experience, I do not know, he says. In other words, something bizarre happened. We just don't know what it was. There are the four reasons historians still take the resurrection seriously. Plenty of them don't believe in it, but they're taking it more seriously, I think, than the public realises. Number one, there was no cultural precedent that we can find that might have promoted the belief in a resurrected Jesus. Number two, the resurrection was being preached and committed to memory from the very earliest days, early 30s. It wasn't part of a developing legend. Number three, there was almost certainly an empty tomb that cries out for an explanation. And number four, we know that plenty of people put themselves forward as eyewitnesses to the resurrection of Jesus. And what's more, many of them died for that faith. I know plenty of people die for causes they believe in, but these people were the ones who knew whether it was false or not, and they still gave their lives.